This time on Poll Hub, it's polls, polls, polls. As it should be. Everybody's out polling voters, trying to determine which Democrat's running ahead in the race for the White House and which one might be best positioned to beat the incumbent. But do national polls matter in this case? Not if you're an Iowan or New Hampshireite, but maybe they do for the rest of us. We're going to talk about that. We're digging through this pile of polls to explain what they really mean at this stage of the race. So, let's get to it. And hi, everybody. Welcome to Poll Hub. I'm J.D. Dapper, Director of Innovation here at the Marist Poll.
And I'm Barbara Carvalho, Director of the Marist Poll.
And I'm Lee Marigoff, Director of the Marist College Institute for Public Opinion. And I've been given the task of trying to decipher all these polls that you are alluding to, Jay. So
good luck. I'm going to go get a coffee.
Actually, well, I was just about to say, you don't have to go it alone, Lee.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll start the discussion. So we've had a lot of Democratic national primary polls lately. In fact, I think we've had 11 or 12 since mid-October, and most of them are showing Biden ahead. There was one poll put out by Q Poll during this period that had Warren ahead, but that seems to have been more of an outlier than anything else.
Nationally.
These are national Democratic polls, and I bet you guys have some question about the value of that. And I'll let you guys say, is there a value in having national Democratic primary polls?
Well, I mean, I asked that only because, Iowa is the first in the nation. That's where the caucuses are. And then New Hampshire. And how many times have we seen people leading in polls? Herman Cain, for instance, at this point in 1 year, who
Howard Dean.
Yeah, Howard Dean. By the time you get...
Wasn't Rudy Giuliani ahead at one point?
He was number one at this stage in 2008, I believe. Yeah. And Newt Gingrich was maybe a little bit later. I think it was in December of one of those years. Does it matter? I mean, you get on the other side of New Hampshire, and I'm not sure it does. But then again, if Joe Biden comes out of Iowa and New Hampshire in first place, then we will look back and say, yeah, the polls had it right.
Yeah, and sometimes they are and sometimes they aren't. Ms. Carvalho.
Well, but I think there is a different role of the polls this year than there have been in other years. And that is that these polls have become one of the ways in which candidates can qualify for debates.
There you go.
And so with another couple of debates, and the bar has been, raised, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. But is that worthwhile?
Yeah, well, and I think it shows some direction. So we've learned something during the course of this campaign. Kamala Harris, had a little bit of a surge and then a decline. Clearly, Elizabeth Warren has had a good campaign so far. He came out of some obscurity to be right up in the thick of things. Joe Biden is sort of, everybody's waiting for him not to do but it hasn't happened. He's still pretty much in front of all these national Democratic polls. And there's Bernie Sanders, who, has been there as well in the thick of things. And then we're watching for Buttigieg and others. However, having said that, give me a good Iowa, give me a good New Hampshire poll.
So these are the top four. What has happened clearly, at least nationally, is that there's a pack, and then there are the leaders of the pack. And the leaders of the pack, much like in a marathon, have really separated themselves by a pretty big distance from the rest of them. And that's shown in what limited Iowa and New Hampshire and South Carolina and Nevada, the first four elections or primaries, caucuses. Those have shown up in those state polls, limited state polls as well. That these four, Buttigieg and Biden and Warren and Bernie, have really separated themselves. Yeah. So I think there's value there in seeing that. But I don't think that when you're talking to national pollsters, and again, as a reporter, not national pollsters, in national polls, as a reporter, when I was looking at these and reporting on the state of the race, I would much rather have been in Iowa talking to likely caucus goers, because no matter what national people in national polls are saying right now, they don't get a chance to vote, many of them, for 3 or 4 or 5 months.
Or not at all for anything relevant.
And who knows if any of these people, it's likely they will, but who knows if any of them. And so I think what you get is you're getting name recognition. You're getting the fact that the dollars are the highest for these four. They've raised the most amount of money.
And enthusiasm. We can see that people are
and there's some enthusiasm, but the rallies and the enthusiasm are happening in these early states. And so that's where the rubber's going to hit the road, and they're either going to make it or they're not.
But there are a lot of characteristics that people are looking at when they're assessing these candidates within the states. Do you think there's a value to having some of these national polls, particularly those that pose some of these? You mentioned these candidates that are kind of at the top of the list, Lee, and putting them in early matchups against Trump. Because one of the things that Democrats are really, really interested in, Democrats just overall, they want to beat Donald Trump next year. And so electability becomes something that is a very important factor in their decision. So
right now,
these
Joe
polls
Biden is
have an
seen
impact?
as seen as being most electable.
You think that's what's keeping him in it?
I think it's a large part of that. Also, he has support within the Democratic Party of people of color, and that is going to emerge when you get past Iowa and New Hampshire and you get to Nevada and you get to South Carolina. The chemistry of the race changes dramatically, and if Biden can hold on to that and doesn't run into big troubles in either Iowa or New Hampshire, then he might emerge at that point. But then we talk about the general election, and we're talking about Donald Trump and this interesting development that has been identified, that despite his low approval rating and with this impeachment hanging over him, he's really in a different position with the potential electoral college than he is with the popular vote. The national polls are showing that there's a double-digit lead for most of these candidates against Donald Trump in the popularity, the
just
popular
like
vote.
The national polls had Clinton up by 2, and she won by 2.
Yeah,
and the national popular vote.
And this is also very early, and that has to be the asterisk by everything we say at this point. But clearly, that's part of the chemistry of what's going on here. The other part is, there was a poll put out by the New York Times in Siena about 6 battleground states, and there you see where the Electoral College comes into play, and there these Democrats aren't doing so well with the same coalition of support that Trump had.
Biden's the only one who allegedly beats Trump in this case. I shouldn't say allegedly. It is what the poll says. So Biden is essentially the only one across the board who in all these states except for North Carolina is able to beat Trump. Bernie can win in a couple of them, but it's by a very narrow margin. But again, this is November. The poll was in October of 2019. And I just think I'm just going to rain on the parade of the meaning of polls over and over again. I think in this case that when you ask somebody in Michigan about this right now, that is based on no information that will develop over the next 4 or 5 months of this campaign, and that Trump could win Michigan by 10 points. He could lose it by 10 points, and it's very hard to say right now.
But these are the morning odds. So what the upshot New York Times and Siena did was the 6 states they took a look at and polled were Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Florida, Arizona, North Carolina. All states we're going to hear an awful lot about.
Probably will be polling them too.
As this 2020 race continues. And I think one of the things that was interesting and caught a lot of attention about their headline was how close Trump still was within those states, and the fact that Democrats really hadn't made any inroads into what was once their base, which were working class Democrats, and have now become part of the Trump base. So doesn't that have some implications about strategy for the Democrats, campaign strategy? We're looking at the primary season of this progressive and moderates. Is there a risk to the Democrats of having this kind of
in the fall? I don't see. This is the traditional thing that always happens. Republicans jog right and then jog center. So they jog right in the primaries, they jog center. In the general, Democrats go the other way. Elizabeth Warren, if she were to become the nominee, is not going to be wearing the Mao red star that she appears to be right now in a general election, no matter how hard that Donald Trump wants her to.
I thought
that's just the way that.
I thought. Let me throw in a couple other minor, points onto these this 6-state look at these critical battleground states. And one of the things I wanted to say was when Donald Trump is put up against a generic Democrat, he doesn't do as well right now. Why? Because if I'm for Elizabeth Warren, I may not be for Joe Biden right now because I just said to the pollster I'm really in Warren's corner, and I might be a little less eager to throw my lot in with someone else. So in a sense, the generic Democrat is doing better against Donald Trump right now than the others. And I wanted to say one other thing about this poll. You have to also look at field dates. This thing was conducted, these 6 states, over about a 2-week period. And so you do have sort of a mixing and matching. It reflects what we've talked about. Productivity's down, and it's harder to do this than it has been.
And one other thing on just the method sides and kind of really getting a little deep in the survey weeds, but the sampling frame. And that is how they get the phone numbers, how the pollsters figure out who it is we're going to randomly select. In the Siena poll, what they're doing is what's called registered based sampling, which means they're going to the registration lists within each state and they are surveying or randomly selecting people from those lists. And, that can be useful in some states because some states do a really great job of connecting those lists with the phone number so that you can get in contact with most registered voters. And a lot of states don't have late registration or same-day registration.
What do we know about these 6 states in RBS?
It's a mix. It's really a mix. But RBS can be really tough in high turnout presidential election years, which we expect 2020 to be, because they're more likely to select and sample people who have been on the rolls for a very long time and people who have addresses and phone numbers, which they've also had for a very long time, so they can be matched. So just put kind of a little asterisk there, because that is also another reason. It's not just that they're surveying the states, but they're using a different method of selecting voters in order to do that.
However, I got the first word on these. I'll take the last word as well. We're talking about how early it is.
You always get the
We
last
always
word.
let you have the last word.
When Ronald Reagan ended up being elected in 1980, he was trailing Carter now. He was also trailing Ted Kennedy now. Also, George W. Bush, 41, looked like he was invincible when he ran for re-election. And then we had the Clinton, the Bush 43, the Barack Obama, all struggled but managed to win. So the early polls, helpful, but not the last word by any stretch.
Money and strategy, not necessarily
and here I thought I was
the
getting the
prediction of the
last
future.
word.
I wouldn't let you do that.
No,
So
that's okay.
One of the things these polls do is talk about, obviously, the criteria for the debates. We mentioned that. The 6th Democratic debate is coming up, and this one has the toughest. I mean, the whole idea was to graduate, right, the threshold. It made it harder and harder because we started, how did we start with, 23?
20.
I kind of lost track, yeah.
I think the joke was 23 and me, so there must have been 24.
Yeah, okay. So, and we're down to whatever the number is now, and by the time this,
there's some people
by
running
the
but
time
aren't
this is
making the
available
debate, so-
on iTunes in 2 days, that may be fewer people. But where are we with this criteria now in this 6th debate? Do we think it's any fairer than we have
I don't
from
know.
the start?
I think people are getting used to it a little bit, but yeah, now you need 4% as opposed to 3% for November, and then it goes up.
4% for December.
For December, I'm sorry. As opposed to 3% in the current November one. So we're looking ahead to December right now, and I guess how you do in November may affect whether you make it for December. But yeah, so you have to have, in national polls or in the early polls, you have to get to 6% in 2 of those, and then you have
early
more,
state polls.
Yeah,
So-
early state polls. Then
so
you need more money. You need a lot more
But
money than you had in the beginning, 200,000 unique donors as opposed to 165,000, et cetera, et cetera. So,
But
yeah,
this-
the goalpost moves a little bit.
Try again, Jay.
This early
Try again.
But this early state thing.
Oh, your microphone is working.
This early state poll thing, isn't this the biggest red flag of all? Because it's hard, as we know, to poll Iowa, caucuses, Democratic caucus goers. New Hampshire's a little easier because it's an open primary, but they're going to be looking at early state polls, which we know have some real problems. Isn't that a
which
big
is why
problem?
I get to always, every 4 years, take the Boy Scout oath here and say we do not like to do horse race polls, prior this early to, and especially to affect the process of
I
the
think
debate qualification.
this time, in order to be doing scientific polls in these early states, it's incredibly time consuming and very expensive to do large sample sizes that will be able to kind of differentiate the support that these candidates have. And I know, Lee, you have talked endlessly about the fact that polls are not this
Rightly so.
exact.
Here,
and
I
rightly
barely
so,
have a
yes.
voice today, and I'm being picked on, and I can't come to my defense. It's
Oh,
really
I don't think you've ever had that problem.
all right.
But we are saying most of that in jest. But it is true that
Most
polls
of
are
that in jest. Did I hear most of that in jest? Not all of it.
Yeah, most of it.
Most of
Okay.
it.
Most
Some
of
of it, some of it we mean. But but I think the part of it that we do mean is that it is difficult for polls to be that exacting.
Yeah.
That is not something that they can do. And I know we've talked about that before, but you make a really good point, Jay, that as the threshold increases, that differentiation between the support that different candidates are getting, particularly beyond the top, four or five that are in the top tier, is really, really difficult.
And if you have productivity issues and you have to have a reduced sample size, you have fewer likely voters. That means a wider margin of error, and that
Well,
makes
that's what
these-
we're seeing in
and
those
that makes
early
this
state
goalpost
polls.
seem a little,
Yeah.
So
If you
we're gonna
dig
keep-
if you dig into, dig down into the early state polls, and this is for most of the folks that are doing this, you'll see that the sample sizes are much more reduced than they were 4 years ago. The field dates are likely
be
longer,
longer.
and that's just the nature of being able to do scientific
So
polls.
we're going to keep an eye on these state polls and which ones that the party uses, because I think we'll want to talk about that as we get closer, especially to the December debate, and people making it because they got to 6% in a poll that had 250 Democrats or something. I mean, we'll call that out. But we're going to keep an eye on the polls that they choose to use at the state level and see what shakes out. I do think by the time you get to December, with all of these requirements, that we will have a stage that doesn't have to have 10 podiums.
And some are dropping out even without
And some
being
are
able to
dropping
raise
out.
some money.
Yeah,
but we
yeah.
did, just to finish up our discussion today, we did hear from the director of the Mountain State Poll.
Montana
We
State.
it's the Mountain State Poll
Oh,
that did Montana and Iowa. I'm sorry, Montana and Wyoming. Yeah, now you threw me off.
Sorry.
And we did hear, and the professor there did point out that just like what we're
Dr.
saying.
Jason Atkins,
yes,
who's the director
of the poll,
as well as a professor of political science.
and
we
he
talked about this last week.
Yeah, and he pointed out that, this is what we've been talking about. There's a problem of getting the kind of numbers you need, which he understood, to get an accurate poll, an accurate snapshot of these contests.
and to have the budget to do so,
Yes,
because it's very expensive.
It's gotten difficult, and I appreciate him, responding. And also, the question is, on the release side, do we want to make these public? And if you do, with transparency, do you have to, kind of have a disclaimer about the sample size? And that probably would be one area that we would encourage in the future.
It was a class project, and I mean,
Which is good.
which is excellent. I mean, this is a great way for students to understand what the political process is, understand public opinion, to be talking to people randomly.
It's how we
throughout
started 41 years ago.
Absolutely. But when it goes beyond the classroom and then starts becoming part of the public dialogue, that's when I think we need we need more transparency. And I think that's when we need to also have some caution about what is presented and how it is presented. And perhaps, given the small sample size, to look at the Democratic primary contest in those states perhaps was not a topic that the students should have taken on, but some issues that may be more relevant to both Wyoming and Montana state residents.
And to be fair, we were really as critical of the media picking up on this because
Yes,
the reporters really should have been able to look and say, oh, you had 15 Democrats or whatever. That's not a poll that we should be writing about. And I think there was some journalistic, little bit of malpractice, if you will, on that side.
But I appreciate the dialogue and the opportunity
and
to
then thank Dr. Atkins for not only responding to our podcast from the last time, but also for confirming all of the numbers and being available to confirm the numbers that we had seen in the news.
Well, that'll do it for this edition of Poll Hub. Poll Hub is a production of the Marist Poll at Marist College in Poughkeepsie, New York. Mary Griffith is our executive producer. Casey Schaff is our editor.
And we would also like to thank the Roper Center Archives, a big event coming up in another week or so in New York City, their annual dinner. They're based at Cornell University. They provide us with the ability to look back in time at survey questions and results over the decades. And Barb, you're going to say something that's really something we're very happy about. Something about
I thought you were going to
say it.
Come on, Lee. You were going to toot our horn because I know you're fond of quoting the former governor and the father of the current governor of New York, Mario Cuomo. If you don't toot your own horn, there is no music.
Okay, so Nate Silver, 538, respected organization, came out with an update of their grades that they give to the 400 public pollsters, and we were one of 6 to get an A+. I don't give out a lot of A+ in class, but I'm sure happy to receive one.
Have you ever given an A+ out in class?
I don't think we have A+.
Okay, well, we're definitely glad that Nate does, and we're appreciative to have that, as well as recognize the hard work that the over 300 students a semester do at the Marist Poll here, along with Mary Griffith newsfeed students. So talk to us on social media. We're at Marist Poll on Twitter, Marist Poll on Facebook. We expect and we look for your comments, your suggestions, your questions, and of course, don't forget to subscribe.